everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I wanted to thank everybody who subscribed after the Michael Freeman video. Michael being the son of Bigfoot researcher Paul Freeman, who shot what's arguably the second best known and most compelling footage of a Bigfoot close to 30 years ago. Michael's coming out with a new book in October. Stay tuned for a link to that. It should be available soon. I will make it known here on this channel. And the video's been doing great. It's at 18,000 views as of September 27th. It's crazy the amount of interest it's gotten in just a few weeks. I don't think Michael and I were expecting that level of interest, but we're both very happy to share information about Michael's book and his father's legacy, who deserves to be a guy who deserves to be well known. So into the present. I'm very excited to set up this interview, this new interview, hopefully second in a series, or second in what I hope to be a series of interviews with Bigfoot researchers, people in the community. Simeon Hein, who is just a PhD, who just put out this book, Dark Matter Monsters. I first heard about it over a tweet by Ronnie LeBlanc, one of the hosts of Expedition Bigfoot. Fantastic show. It's been on for it's going to be on for 4 seasons. But anyway, Ronnie tweeted about this book. I thought it was incredible. Simeon's been looking into this topic since 2017. And he is basically, he takes a very scientific view of it and has aggregated a wide variety of sources, everything from David Paulides to Skinwalker Ranch. He talks about Ron Moorhead and the Sierra Sounds, but he really looks at this phenomenon, the phenomenon of Bigfoot and other cryptids through the lens of science, and proposes some very interesting theories that really, in my mind, puts him at the forefront of Bigfoot research. So I want to get into the interview, which I'm sure will be a great one, and just ask for your support. If you enjoy this channel and the videos that I'm making, please consider buying a Bigfoot T-shirt at creatureportal.com. I'm modeling the green version here. This is based on Patty's face. It's an illustration that I did myself. So again, creatureportal.com, support my work, and consider buying my music at richardturgeon.com. So without any further ado, I'm going to segue into my interview with Mr. Simeon Hein, again, author of Dark Matter Monsters. So, I'm going to start off officially now.
Yes.
So, I am here with Simeon Hein. Is that how you pronounce your last name? Hein?
Yes.
Ph.D., author of this incredible book, Dark Matter Monsters.
Hey.
Order your copy now, or wait till the end of the interview at darkmattermonsters.com, Simeon's website. We have a lot to talk about. This is the second interview in a series. I interviewed Mike Freeman, son of Paul Freeman, last time. Simeon was gracious enough to loan his time out for the second interview. We have a lot to talk about tonight.
We do. We do.
I was just saying, I was talking to Simeon a little bit before this, and I found his book in a tweet by Ronnie LeBlanc, one of the co-hosts of Expedition Bigfoot. It's in its 4th season. I've watched it since the very first episode. I'm a big fan. And Simeon, just so you know, if I'm looking over here, it's because my questions are over here. Here's my teleprompter on my other computer screen. But I love this book from the moment I read the description, because I felt like it's starting with a theory that puts a lot of pieces together in the paranormal world. Everything from Bigfoot to UFOs to cryptids, all these things that, missing time, disappearances. I see that it runs the complete gamut. And so I was eager to dig in. I think I read it in a few nights, but it's fascinating. And I really feel like it puts you at the forefront of the research. And I've just never seen somebody tie it together so nicely and through a scientific lens. I can't say that I can't pretend to understand all the science that you deep dive into. So we'll unpack that a little bit. But I wanted to start off by just asking you a bit about your background, how you came to be interested in the subject of Bigfoot, I know that you were already into crop circles, remote viewing, and that your Bigfoot journey started with a pair of socks, Bigfoot socks, that I also own, the exact same thing. So when I opened your book and saw that picture starting out, I was like kismet. But it's impressive that you've only been at this since 2017, since I've been reading about Bigfoot since I was a child of the 70s. So just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you started your journey into this topic.
Well, thanks a lot, Rich. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me here tonight. And thanks to everyone who's listening and watching. I'm a slow learner. I came to the topic late because I'm a product of the academic system, and there's a resistance in your mind to these sort of topics. I mean, I think it's from the time we're in kindergarten, we're told that these things are fictional. And it's, you're going up against 27 years of, in my case, of school, from kindergarten to PhD. And no one ever talks about this. Well, I shouldn't say no one. I was downstairs from Grover Krantz, the anthropologist, one of the maybe 4 in the U.S. that studied this. Now, I didn't know about it back in the 80s, even though there were plenty of sightings, Paul Freeman sightings in the Blue Mountains, Wallowa Mountains, near Walla Walla, that area, Oregon, Washington. That's not far from WSU, and Grover Krantz was familiar with this. I learned about Grover Krantz actually more through that book, Bigfoot of the Blues by Vance Orchard, a journalist from the Walla Walla area that wrote about Paul Freeman and many other forest rangers out there in that watershed and that national forest who had seen the creatures there in the 80s. I think Grover Krantz must have, I don't know when he started this, but that was part of his territory. I'm just saying there was a weird synchronicity in my career as a sociologist at Washington State University where he was just upstairs from me. And I probably passed him in the hall many times, but didn't realize his significance until a few years ago. So my background, Rich, since you asked, is, I did have a UFO sighting with my mom in the Everglades. I was 11 or 12. We were bird watching in a sewerage area where birds like to go, water purification area. And I saw something that I thought was the moon, and I kept telling my mom to look, and she knew the moon was on the horizon. When she finally looked up, she said, "Sim, it's a UFO." We both had binoculars. I could see it was cloud-like and had structure. To an 11 or 12-year-old mind, I did not know what to do with this. It did not fit, just did not fit. It was round, it was bright, but it had a structure of dots, lit dots in it that formed a Z. Yeah, a Z. And we're looking at it, and then all of a sudden it starts moving, and it picks up speed and goes into a cloud. And then all the lights go out. We go to a ranger talk in the dark. The ranger says, "Did anyone see anything interesting today?" And my mom raises her hand, honest woman as she is. "We saw a UFO." And the ranger said, "Oh, that's interesting. Did anyone else see anything today?" Like, she totally blew it off.
Blew off, yeah.
I didn't know anything about Project Blue Book, UFO cover-ups. I'm just a 12-year-old in the early 70s. And yet here, something didn't seem right in my gut.
Fishy.
My mom had brought up, the people next to us had seen it. Lights were out. It was big as a moon, full moon, up right above you. We saw it with binoculars. How often do you have binoculars when that thing was bright and glowing and stationary? Then all of a sudden it starts moving. What was that? And then she didn't even want to talk about it. So, okay, I didn't have too much experience after that. Excuse me. I did read John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecies, somewhere along the way. Carlos Castaneda, who one of my high school teachers had gone to school with at Stony Brook.
I read all 4 of his books too.
Yeah, and so he's talking about a separate reality, but Castaneda wasn't into UFOs or anything scientific. It's a more of a anthropology book, debate whether it was fictional. Is that the Yaqui culture? Is it his? And it didn't really matter because I went to college, then graduate school, and a lot of this faded away. Somewhere along the way, I came across the book by Timothy Good, Above Top Secret. I think it was in a bookstore in college. In the back of your mind, when you've seen something like what we saw in the Everglades, it's sort of a question that no one answers in school. Your teachers don't answer. So it's sort of back there. But I got acculturated into sociology, statistics. I became an assistant professor at WSU. And this stuff was not anywhere in my mind. Zippo. I left it behind. However, I did come across the concept of fractal geometry in graduate school. And that became the subject of my thesis because it seemed that's how nature works. Branching structures, lightning, trees, your lungs, hair, things that branch off and never resolve to a line. That seemed like a good approximation of my understanding of reality. My graduate committee, first one, did not like it. And I just said, well, I'm going to fire them and get a whole new 5 other guys. It was all guys in Department of Sociology, almost all of them. And got 5 more guys. They said, okay, you can do it. So it was like measuring things with fractals. That we'll see this becomes important into all these phenomena. But at the time, to me, it was just a way of measuring things. And okay, so I'm out of graduate school. I'm at Boulder, Colorado. I hear some guy talking about remote viewing. Courtney Brown on the community radio station. Now, I had listened to Robin Claire, her show at KGNU in Boulder, and she had reputable people, academics and environmentalists and all sorts of interesting characters and people, musicians on her show. I forgot what the name of it was. So here's this guy, political scientist, and he's talking, well, there's something called remote viewing, classified program, and I'm a bit incredulous listening to this. But he said, well, I've got a book. It's called Cosmic Voyage. So I listened to the interview and I thought, well, if this is true, this would sort of be what fractal geometry suggests to us, is that there are connections between things that you can't see. Things that are unexpected could be true, but I don't believe that everyone can do it. But the only way for me to find out is get the book. And at the back of the book, I read the book. I almost didn't get it. I'm walking out of the bookstore, put it back on the shelf. And a voice in my head says, go back and get the book. What was that? Okay, I go back and get the book, plunk down a chunk of change, $29.95 for a hardcover, and I read the book, and it just seems way out there. Is remote viewing Mars and all. Is this real? But some of it was verifiable targets, and I thought either this is the biggest hoax or this is really important. And the only way to find out is call the 800 number at the back of the book. So I called the number. A couple hours later, Courtney calls back. He says, we have 1 place left in our next class in May. You can sign up if you want. $3,000. That's a lot in the 90s. Okay, it's not now. It was a lot in the 90s. But I just felt like, wow, this could be, this just feels significant about this. And I took the course. I went out to Atlanta, took the course, and we did get results. I was surprised, but it did show me there is something that I didn't learn in graduate school, some other pathway that information is traveling. You're describing what's in a folder and you won't see it till you're done. How did you do it so well? And the surroundings. I mean, you move around the target site. The monitor knows the target. You're thinking, like a lot of people think when they first do this, skeptics. I was kind of an open-minded skeptic. I wouldn't say, irrational. I was sort of like, I'm coming out of grad school. I need some data. I need some evidence, and so I'm thinking, is it subliminal? Is it the vocal tone in the monitor? It just seemed something else was going on. Everyone got results after a couple of days, and eventually you're going to do a session that blows you away. That you're going to say, that's just so out of the ballpark. And then you find that the government had been paying for this for 20 years, $20 million, special access program. You start learning about these things. People come to take the train. I became a teacher there, and people came who had worked at NASA. They talked about things I'd never heard of, reverse engineering, more special access programs. And you begin to think, wow, is there like a whole side of reality that we weren't taught about, that society doesn't know about? It didn't seem unreasonable the government would have classified programs and things that might have a real advantage, like having super psychics working for you. I knew about the Cold War. Everyone growing up then knew about this. And so that's how it started. It started with RV. And it wasn't like I just jumped into this like I needed this. I was already busy doing other things, and fractal geometry and chaos theory was enough to look at things differently. But the idea behind fractal geometry and chaos theory is that small changes can lead to big outcomes, not just big changes lead to big outcomes. Small changes can the butterfly effect. You know, the butterfly flapping its wings over the Amazon could affect the weather in China. And so you're thinking, well, what sort of phenomena fit that? Well, RV was kind of like that because it's such subtle, but here it expands onto your page. The aperture opens as, and we learned about Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann called it. It's like this very subtle signal, but it expands on the page and inflates. That's sort of what chaos theory tells us should be happening. That you don't understand everything that's going on, but it has its own logic. So this kind of fit into that. And anyway, it leads to other topics. We did RV on crop circles at the time in '96. I had never heard of crop circles, but I did get some interesting data in the session, and I wanted to go over there to see was my session accurate? Some energies, shapes, you know, what's going on here, symbols. I went over there and saw the cameras and batteries dying in cameras, my own, other people's, melting, solder joints melted. I used to build electronic kits as a kid. I would take my paper route money and snow shoveling money and go to Radio Shack and Heathkit and assemble my own little kits. Like as a kid, you have little hobbies, you know, things to distract you from school. Mine was making kits of electronics. And I never saw anything melt or burn out on its own. So I knew enough about electromagnetics. This is not ordinary. You don't just get cameras malfunctioning over and over. So the RV leads to crop circles. You start going to conferences. You hear credible witnesses in the UFO field. So it all begins to escalate. And it leads to this idea that there's more going on than you were taught from kindergarten to PhD. And this matters. There's something serious going on. Again, we all heard of Tesla, but now you find out that Tesla stuff could be replicated now, and maybe people that did it were suppressed. So one thing leads to the other because you begin to see there's another description of reality that's not mechanistic. And that led to my first book called Opening Minds, where I realized there's just more going on. Channeling came into it. I initially was very skeptical of channeling, but after a few minutes, you realize no one could keep talking like that, not even an actor, without making some mistake or something. And this is going on for an hour, and they keep talking. You know, you start getting exposed to these topics, spirits, ghosts. You start looking. Rich, to summarize, I know I'm saying a lot here. You start looking at other evidence that you didn't need to when you were in academia because you were on a career track. And when you're on that career track, you're told, don't mess it up for yourself. Just stick to the program. You do want to get tenure, don't you? You know, you put a lot of time. Every graduate student hears this lecture somewhere along the line. Just stick with the program and you'll be fine. Isn't that what you want to hear after you put your whole life into getting a degree? You sort of feel like, okay, I've been working. I sort of want something that's sort of like a steady sort of career out of this until you realize, wait a minute, something's missing from all this. And if you go and do that, you're not telling the truth. You're omitting part of reality to fit a career track. And just like Geddy Lee from Rush wrote these songs about suburbia.
I went to see Rush when I was in high school,
okay.
So I'm a fellow fan. Yeah, I got the reference.
Yeah, what was his song about suburbia? Not just working man. There was one about something lines, and it was about the boringness of suburbia growing up in Canada.
Yeah.
And it wasn't any different for me growing up in suburban New York near IBM headquarters and the company man mindset. So just like Geddy Lee said, never do anything that would violate the ethics you had as a teenager. I was not a Rush fan until more recently. I think we all end up being there in the end. I was a Zepp guy more because I grew up near Madison Square Garden, and that was my first concert ever as a 14-year-old with Zeppelin in 77.
Lucky you.
77 tour. They did 6 nights at the Garden. They didn't do that many tours in the U.S. 75, 77, and I think that was about it. And they didn't come back after that, and they did Knebworth in 79. They didn't do that many tours over here. But I happened to see them because I'm just the train station. You get on the train with your brother, and he takes you. And so I ended up with Zeppelin. Any case, the Geddy Lee stuff was what happened to me, which was there's something more going on here. And I just want to be who is that folk singer? I grew up around a lot of folk songs. Pete Seeger was on the Hudson, not far from here. Hudson Valley UFO song. Yeah. Pete Seeger, I went on the sloop with Pete Seeger. And there was people around here who were folk artists who had this kind of non-conformity idea that don't just be like everyone else. You know, that song about there's this house and they're all made of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same, about those Levittowns on Long Island. And this is what Geddy Lee was talking about in a lot of his songs, if you've listened to his interviews. So it's a long answer to your question, but I grew up thinking maybe there's more than we're taught. Maybe, and so all of this fit into that. Remote viewing, crop circles. I've seen it for myself. I like to see things for myself. Going to UFO conferences, talking to witnesses, talking to researchers, Roger Lear, who did the implant removal, and Varginha. He was the first Varginha incident. There is a Moment of Contact, the movie by James Fox, coming out very soon. But Roger Lear was where I learned about it years ago. You need to hear these people, and some of them sounded very credible. And it just started to build in me this idea that we had missed science. There was a hole in science, as I said, the chapter in Dark Matter. There's something missing. I didn't need that to be there. It was where the evidence led me.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's so much that was like your kind of your ethos, your life story in a few minutes, right? And it kind of how it brought you to this point. But to me, you know, the eyewitnesses to these things are today's heroes. To me, academics like yourself, career academics, are the heroes that are helping push this forward. This area of inquiry that's been going on for such a long time, and it blew up. You know, Bigfoot blew up in the late '60s and the '70s, and there are very few academics like Jeffrey, Dr. Jeff Meldrum, Grover Krantz, your neighbor at Washington State downstairs from you. You know, these people are risking their careers and their credibility by stepping forward and saying, like, hey, the evidence is here. I know how to read dermal ridges on a footprint. There's no way this could be faked by some park ranger or whatever. So when I read your book, I kind of put you in the same category as just somebody who's bravely stepping forward and with an open mind, with academic training, and, finally saying, like, there are things that we don't know yet that science can't explain. And it kind of goes back to your dedication. The book is dedicated to Claire from the UK, who encountered unknown creatures near Carmel Highlands and the Sea Otter Reserve.
Oh my God.
Not far from me.
There.
And told to keep quiet about it. And
you know about her episode 515 on Sasquatch Chronicles?
No, but I'll have to look that up.
People should listen to this one. You need to listen to that episode. It's a serious situation.
Okay, I will definitely look that up.
People are being told to keep quiet about this.
Yes.
And it's not fair.
Yeah.
They didn't ask for this. Let me just step back for a second, Rich. How I got from a full life of RV crop circles. I gave many crop circle tours over there. Last one was 2019, just COVID's right after there. UFOs, believe me, it's busy enough. I had heard a couple lectures at UFO conferences, Kawani Lapsarides, a couple others along the way. Stan Gordon, excellent book, Silent Invasion, UFO Bigfoot.
I have it.
Pennsylvania. I've heard him lecture several times. Now listen, even hearing those, I did not know how to fit it in with these other topics. No, seriously, I encountered witnesses in my RV classes in Boulder, Colorado. Until COVID hit, we would do them all live several times a year in an office on the Pearl Street Mall, Boulder, Colorado, one of the best pedestrian malls in the U.S. And people would say during lunch, this is what happened to me. And I didn't. So that's interesting. I didn't know how to connect it because I had believed the Lauren Coleman anthropologist point of view that this is a relic primate, a relic hominoid, I think it would be correct term, or homonym, not a hominid like us. And so going back to the 90s, listening to Art Bell and Coleman, he would be on the show a lot. I just bought it hook, line, and sinker. I'm not criticizing either Art Bell or Lauren Coleman for this point of view. But that's all we knew in the 90s was the Jeff Meldrum and Grover Krantz view. I met someone else this evening just at a family event, Daniel Schmidt, who went to school with Jeff Meldrum, and he told me he's familiar with all these points of view, and he's written about it too. Cousin. I believed that point of view for a long time, that this is probably a undiscovered primate, Gigantopithecus blackie or something like this. And maybe, like Coleman said, there were a few thousand of them scattered throughout the Northwest, very rare, hard to see them. They're very good at evading contact. And it's just basically an escaped gorilla type thing.
Right.
Your ordinary, it's just like a mammal that survived the ice ages.
Came across the Bering Strait,
yes,
and it's just hiding out there. You can't find it.
Can't find it. It's big. Yeah. It's 1,000 pounds. You look it up on Wikipedia. That's it. Okay, that sounds like Bigfoot, right? There's only one problem. That's not what people are seeing.
Right.
It doesn't fit the evidence.
Yeah.
It fits an academic description. It would fit. And Meldrum and the Krantzes, very brave people to push it as far as they could in their department. It was so controversial. I didn't even hear about it at WSU when Grover Krantz was upstairs in the anthro department. I'm on the third floor, so he's anthro fourth. I never even heard of him. That's how controversial it was. And he was just arguing from the Blue Mountain area, Walla Walla, Wallowa Mountains, up in there, big national forest, that that was the primate idea, the undiscovered primate, relic primate, rare. Somehow we didn't find them. And you've heard examples of animals being discovered, mountain gorillas and things like this that no one knew about, that originally they thought, what could this be? So I believe that, but I encountered witnesses, and they would say things along with Jacques Vallée had. I talked with him once after his presentation. He presented a viewing conference. He said, Simeon, they're not telling you something about these UFO. And I said, what is it? Because the people are having telepathic encounters before the sighting, and afterwards they feel different. Don't feel the same. We even heard this about the Tic Tac witnesses.
Yeah.
Alex Dietrich and Dave Fravor made reference to this, though we haven't heard them talk very much what happened to them. So Jacques Vallée said, no, there's something more going on. These are not just little guys getting in a metal ship. He said, because people are feeling something before the encounter. And I had heard Stan Gordon lecture, and I didn't know how to put it together in my mind. Why would a relic hominoid have anything to do with an advanced species from Alpha Centauri? It doesn't add up until you realize it's neither of those. It's not physical craft coming from necessarily just a physical craft flying over here like lost in space in a tin can and landing. And that Bigfoot, it's the same thing that Jacques Vallée was talking about. You read these encounters, and so many people report a weird feeling before the encounter. The crickets, they'll say it was so quiet, not even the crickets were chirping. And I had these premonitions. I'm hearing telepathic voices in my mind, a muddy voice, a mechanical, balls of light, orbs, UFOs. Okay, so then you realize the Art Bell interpretation, and I'll call it the original Art Bell interpretation. He did so much for us to bring these topics up, but still have to go beyond even the people that got us there to find out what's really going on. That this is more, this data fits something more akin to parallel realities than it does the escaped gorilla idea, which is what people used to, I'm not kidding, people used to say this 100 years ago in the U.S. They would say a wild man or escaped gorilla. Thinking a circus had been nearby or something. And the UFOs are not entirely physical objects either, which is what we heard from John Ramirez, signal intelligence analyst from the CIA, who's been on many podcasts recently, who said, well, we were looking at them through the keyhole satellites and they have an invisible dark mode. Now, so you start looking at this and you realize, wait a minute, I've seen the cameras and batteries go, but why would that happen around a gorilla? Batteries and cameras. I've been to the zoo many times, like many people. I've never seen my cameras and batteries fail by the monkeys in the gorilla cages. I don't think people have reported that on safaris in Africa. So what it leads you to believe when you look at the symptoms of all these topics, including RV, you go back to Uri Geller being tested at SRI in your state, Stanford Research Institute, as it was known back then, Palo Alto. You look at the movie Third Eye Spies, and what do they talk about? He's bending things, he's moving things around with his mind. You find out that the people that were investigating him would see cryptids. Back home with their wives in bed, they see huge birds at the end of the bed that defy explanation inside. Strange little flying saucers. These are even skeptics. These are people who don't believe this. Some from Lawrence Livermore lab saw a small UFO flying around the lab. And anyone who's been around Uri Geller says that this is what happens. And this is, again, what Jacques Vallée had personally told me at one of the meetings. So you put all this together. I've been on some ghost shows, pilot episodes. You talk to people in towns, in Cripple Creek, Colorado, we were at a sanatorium that had supposedly haunted, and they're doing the EVP. Well, the next morning I'm down at the casino, I'm talking to people. Here we're here with Sci-Fi Channel. Did you ever see? Oh, she said you ought to talk to the bartender. Everything just flew off the shelf one night, and I saw something standing in my room, and my cat was hissing at it. And you start hearing about the battery failure. You start saying, wait a minute. You're getting the same phenomena in all these. There were people who said they saw balls of light come into their rooms where they were doing RV at Farsight. But I didn't know how to make sense of it. It's almost like we can't run blind. We do need theory because we won't know how to assemble the evidence. So the final thing that for me that put this together, and I could be wrong about this, but I think it's the way it makes sense unless someone comes up with a better explanation. Cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction. The people involved in cold fusion were as criticized and pilloried and ridiculed as UFO researchers, Bigfoot researchers. And then you're thinking, wait a minute, I'm a sociologist. Now, why would people ridicule all of these topics just like they ridiculed Einstein, Galileo, Copernicus, even Enrico Fermi, one of the inventors of the atomic bomb? All these people got ridiculed, people in quantum mechanics, Edward Condon committee report. He lost his security clearance over quantum mechanics. They considered it too controversial in the 50s. Go figure. So you're saying, wait a minute. Why are all these people attacking the people involved in this and not the evidence? That is a little suspicious to me. It sounds that what they did with Einstein, this book, 100 scientists prove Einstein wrong. And I looked at this in college, and there's these kind of half-baked arguments against general relativity theory. Anyway, you start to wonder whether society is just in this huge process of denial of reality. And again, you go back, you've seen a UFO as an 11, 12-year-old. Now you're looking at all of the topics. You're looking, big real scientists are involved in studying this, 100 years of data for RV. And yet you get all this criticism of it. You look at cold fusion, you see, wait a minute. There are people that replicated this. Israeli labs replicated it. The Navy replicated it. Why do they call it junk science when you have the U.S. Department of Energy sponsoring the research, ENEA in Italy? I mean, it starts not making sense until you start realizing this could be like a type of massive social denial of reality. The very thing that created rock and roll, which is another way to look at reality and experience reality, to enjoy it in the moment with music and sound and movement, with new beats and new rhythms that went beyond jazz. And as a musician, you know about this.
Yeah.
The Beatles versus the people that came before them, the break with reality into a whole new genre that is considered so radical that parents don't want their kids going to Beatles concerts and stuff. You know what I mean? And so, now to us, the Beatles seem kind of tame, but back then they seemed like wild men. They were the Bigfoot of their time. Long hair, and they were wild, and they're up there with their electric guitars, and they're not just doing it the jazz way. It
blew people's mind. And I've studied the late 60s quite a bit, and everything you're speaking to in terms of, altered realities and seeing the world in a new way, and how music was a conduit to that in the late 60s is actually a fascinating analogy to what I think we're on the tipping point of with people like you writing books like this.
Yes.
And yeah, I want to recall a couple of notes from what you just walked me through. I think the theme is perception, right? And you talked about, hey, I saw this UFO when I was a kid. You push it back and you talk a bit about the psychology and how humans protect themselves subconsciously, right, from such things, because it just blows your mind. Like your mind can't handle it, right? And so there's this piece of it. And then people like you, people like me, studying these things over time, you have families, you have careers, you do different stuff, you got your different activity, you push it back, right? It's not at the forefront, but then over time you start to connect more and more dots. You explore these other corners of things, you connect these dots, and then there's new thinking born of that. And what's happening in society, you spoke to kind of how people are just not ready to process that. You talk about kind of a bell curve, and then how this kind of topic is still an outlier, right? So I feel like the more conversations that we have, the researchers, the more dots that are connected, it's going to push the field forward. And there might be more acceptance of we don't know everything. There is this alternate reality, and we're not perceiving all of that. So
no, it's very well said. And anyone who's involved in any of these areas, all you have to do every day, just make a little progress in whatever area you're in. And this as a musician, when you're writing songs, you don't have to have a blockbuster idea every single day. Just keep go through the song again. Can you improve it a little bit here or there? You'll get the breakthrough you need at some unexpected moment, right? And I'm sure any artist has this sort of experience. It's not just musicians. It'll come together in a way that's very unique to you. It's your contribution to the universe. That's right. The same way with these topics. You're going to go through years of not knowing. The longer you can put up with that sense of confusion, it's called, Leonardo da Vinci called it confusion endurance. I think the Italian phrase is sfumato, going into the mist. It's being able to put up with not knowing the answer. The opposite of how we were trained in school, which is to show how smart you are in front of the whole class and come up with the answer by the end, right? This is not that. And I learned this from RV, Rich, and everyone who's listening. You don't know what your target is. You have to put up with the confusion endurance during the session. You can end the session. It's your session. You can say, I want my feedback anytime. Fine. But you could go for an hour or 2 hours or maybe longer if you're doing an applied session and you don't know what the target is, and you put up with it and you'll get the feedback. It's a real attention training exercise not to get the feedback immediately, not to know what's going on. Type of confusion endurance, the way Da Vinci talked about it. Da Vinci said it was a key to real creativity.
Right.
Yes, and we know about this as artists writing songs. You almost savor it. It's going to get better. You don't know how. You go through it. Sometimes you put it down for a couple of weeks. You pick it up and something else is there. And it just comes together in a very satisfying way, and your fans like it. And it worked. We all know what that is. Well, it's like that with these topics. And
yes,
and what you said is so true. We're so educated to want to have these stable careers, like I was saying, especially academics, like anyone else. I mean, they're not particular, but they want the perks, the rewards, the honors, and there's a conservatism that creeps in. It's an addiction to approval from your peers.
Yeah.
It's an addiction. It's like an addiction to carbohydrates. Believe me, it's serious. And this can rot your soul because you're not telling the truth anymore. You're taking the easy way out. And I'm not blaming anyone for doing this. We all live in a society where we need to have incomes and deal with practical things. There's nothing wrong with that. But are you compromising the truth in a way that you really know you shouldn't be doing? That you should stand up for the mystery and not give in so easily and say it's just a primate? Or because here's what people would do in sociology in my career. They would say, and this is what the other accounts would say, Bigfoot is a type of modern folklore.
Right.
And people have a psychological need to fit in with their peers. So they create these stories, and it just keeps perpetuating at the bar or social gathering or around the barbecue because people need to be accepted by their peers. So, Simeon, why don't you look at this as a type of folklore? Not the evidence as is, but just treat it like a delusion, a social delusion. So I said, wait a minute, that isn't what I've listened to these people tell me stories, and I started reading them. Rich, on my live streams and things, people would say, well, Simeon, what about Bigfoot? And this is just a couple of years ago, and I didn't know the answer, and it bothered me. They'd say, well, what about Dogman? I never heard, what is this? Okay, you get a couple books, go to Amazon, get a couple witness account books that look credible.
Yep.
Start reading for a couple months. Now, is this for real? Like you found out crop circles were really affecting cameras and batteries and making weird things happen, like a little mini vortex for your own eyes, not secondhand. So what are these witnesses saying? And can you find correlations between the accounts, between people who know nothing about each other, get different compendiums of accounts, and you see, wait a minute, these people are all talking about this sudden quiet, this terror that starts growing that is just like beyond any terror you ever felt. Things levitating, floating around before the. I'm thinking, wait a minute. This is what sociologists call a hidden event.
Right.
The folklore is society glossing over it. It's not the witnesses that are creating the folklore. It's the institutions of society covering up something that's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That they don't know how to talk about. Mm-hmm. Law enforcement.
Military.
They don't know what to do. What is this? An animal? Is this an animal report? Dangerous animal report? Is it something with rabies? Is it a person who's under the influence? How do they put it in their reporting sheet of what the witness encountered? They don't know. How do the national park rangers deal with it? Well, there is not publicly, though we found out that they do have their private report. You saw a bear. So what brings this together for me was hearing a couple of years ago another sociologist. We never do anything alone. We always rely on other people to keep going. Dr. Ron Westrom from Harvard Sociology Department, taught at Eastern Washington University. He called these hidden events. And he brought up something we're all familiar with, a difficult subject, child abuse. Mm-hmm. And what he said was that child abuse wasn't considered real until the 60s, until professionals got together, two meetings, Chicago and DC, 62, 65, and they bring law enforcement together, radiologists, psychologists. And they finally realized this is not kids falling out of trees.
Yeah.
This is not kids falling down from their skateboard or getting beaten up at school by a bully. This is their parents. Nobody wanted to confront the parents. Okay, it's the same way with these topics. No one wants to confront the Forest Service, Park Service rangers and say, were you covering this up? Were you told? Nobody wants to confront authority, and so Westrom pointed out that UFOs is, in terms of sociology, was no different than child abuse. That took a couple meetings at DC, a big meeting of professionals to say, oh, this is really happening. It's a real diagnosis. This is what we're seeing right now going on in Congress with the UFO. You could change it, call it UAP, whatever you want, or as the Pentagon now calls it, a transmedium cross-domain threat. If that's easier for you, fine.
Right.
There's a new all-domain anomaly resolution office. Okay, whatever. But you see what's going on here is, and maybe I got this from some of those 60s thinkers, Alan Watts and others. Who is that psychologist who wrote about this? And he just made us think as teenagers, maybe it's not the witnesses that are having the problem. It's the institutions that are reporting it that do not want to change. Kind of like the Soviet Union didn't want to change. And they just want to divide the world into communists and bad guys, and in their ideology, we're the bad guys and they're the good guys, and they don't exist anymore, at least not in the form they were. So this is how it all connects, as you begin to realize this is these topics are sociological to the extent that it could be society that doesn't want to look at the issue and call it witchcraft. Instead, it's easier to label, and we know institutions do this. It's easier to call it delusional than to look at the data. And I
Right.
spoke with a psychiatrist recently. He's in the book, Robert Schwartz. He was kind enough to let me mention him. He's treated many people who've seen Dogfoot, Big Man, and other cryptids in Texas. He originally thought, are these people delusional? I mean, what's going on here? And he looked at it, he said, and he told me on the phone, they're all normal. These are normal people. There's nothing in the Briggs-Meyer test or any of the Minnesota multiphasic test, these tests that they have to determine if you're bipolar or delusional or, all these all these kind of mental, they're not necessarily illnesses, they're like mental disabilities and things, and they can diagnose these. But he said none of these people fit those profiles. They were like ordinary people that hadn't really seen Bigfoot and Dogman.
Right.
And so the shift is kind of like what Westrom's talking about, is hidden events are events that people are experiencing that they're not talking about it. And that's what clicked to me with the Bigfoot topic. I apologize for going on to get to this point. That's how I got into it. I realized it's happening, right? People have been telling me about it. I've been hearing about the lectures at the UFO, and I haven't really. I had very good witnesses come up and tell me about their relatives getting rescued by Bigfoot off a trail after they went on fell off a horse.
Wow.
Went over a cliff, big hand comes down, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know how to put this together until I saw the big connection between all these phenomena, that it's a hidden event because we're limited in our understanding of reality. And this is what it comes down to, and then we can talk about it. There are other types of matter that physicists have known about since before Tesla, coherent matter.
Yep.
Beyond gases and plasmas, there's coherent matter. Plasmas are an abundant type of, glowing gases, aurora borealis, lightning, and it's out in the cosmos, very abundant type of matter, most abundant type of matter in the universe. Beyond plasmas, there's a self-organized type of matter that's also highly abundant. And in studying these researchers, especially Martin Fleisch Memorial Project, Bob Greene, your excellent YouTube presentations for years now, I could see the same pattern being applied in physics, cold fusion areas where scientists had really made a breakthrough. And I can tell this because at the SSE conference, the Society for Scientific Exploration, we had high-level physicists come to us and say, cold fusion's real, we've duplicated it in the lab. I mean, we haven't made it into a sustainable energy device that's going to solve all our needs, but we've gotten it to work for long periods of time, so it's a real effect.
It's not just theoretical anymore.
No. We had multiple people tell us it worked. It wasn't just Fleischmann and Pons at the University of Utah. So then and you realize Tesla was looking at this. So that's the other side of the puzzle. One side is realizing our data is incomplete. There's a hole in science because we're not willing to look at the evidence seriously. We've had disinformation campaigns from the government just in UFO witnesses alone. And this has come up in the Senate hearing and House hearings recently, UAP task force. They identified sociocultural stigma as a barrier to understanding just what the military are seeing in terms of the UAP that they're looking at. Okay, so we paid for this. I interviewed Richard Doty, former Air Force Office of Special Investigation, and he said to me right at Laughlin, we paid journalists to create stories to create confusion about it. We would hire actors to go to witnesses' homes to pretend
disinfo.
Exactly. So it's no wonder we're all confused about this. So that's my take on it as a sociologist, is that there's been not just an unwillingness to look at the witnesses and the data. There's been a disinformation to mess it up as much as possible. No wonder we're all confused. Project Mockingbird, CIA paying journalist 400. One of the women on our crop circle tour in 97, who's now passed on, Diana was her name, just volunteered to us that she worked in the media department at the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, what do they do? She goes, well, I had a Rolodex of 400 journalists and I could just call them up and they'd run a story. I said, well, like
PR,
find their story, or did you write a story and just give it to them that was totally? She said, yes, eat both. I can't believe it. So no wonder we're all confused. We don't know what the difference in truth. So there's that side. And then the other side is realizing that since Nikola Tesla and before, a couple decades before, there was a whole nother line of inquiry going on into energy systems, coherent matter, resonance. That for some reason, because it wasn't seen as profitable by companies and so forth, Rockefellers and Westinghouse and Edison. So they got the patents for these things, but they didn't use them in the way that it could have been used. Too cheap to meter, so to speak. They didn't want that. They wanted it to cost something so that it could be metered. And then you realize it's just getting repressed over and over again. So that's the other part of dark matter monsters, is bringing up researchers like Takeaki Matsumoto from Japan and others who were saying this back in the late 80s, all the way through the 90s, that ball lightning, micro ball lightning, common phenomena is what cold fusion is. But he was censored from publishing in the US because of just mentioning ball lightning, which the last time I checked was not the most controversial topic ever. People have been researching it for hundreds of years in Europe, many people. But then you realize this is why you get orbs around all these phenomena: crop circles, people doing RV, Uri Geller, UFOs, NICAP report, strange effects of UFOs, cold fusion experiments. You get these plasmas and balls of light. And you realize this is sort of the common denominator. Again, so there's two sides of it. There's the side of repressing anything that's sort of outside the paradigm we inherited from the 50s and before, post World War II. Big government science, so forth, didn't fit. You're not going to get funded. Better stay away from that. You're going to lose your job. The other side of it is a whole line of research into coherent matter, going from Tesla and a whole bunch of other researchers from England, by the way. A lot of them were killed in World War I. It's just how history works. Forgotten. Tesla does it. He's almost forgotten, even though, his patents for AC energy were bought by Edison, and it's what we got going on right now is from Tesla. But all his other research into creating communications and resonance and remote control, and all these researchers from there, all the way up to the present, a lot of very good Russian researchers, by the way. And then you look around the Bigfoot cryptid research, and you're saying, that is why people are reporting all of these strange phenomena around Bigfoot, because it wasn't an ape, like Lawrence Coleman told us. No offense to Lawrence if he's listening.
Right.
It was some other interdimensional. Excuse me. Is it some other interdimensional being that's involved in coherence? It's like something on the coherency spectrum. Anyway, you got the idea. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was going to say that's how it was seen by then, and I'm still surprised today by how many people in the Bigfoot community still see it that way. I'm not going to say they're wrong, they're right. That I'm interested in a book like yours because, as you did, you start to read more, you connect more dots, you start to form new theories. My old theory in the 70s was, it's this giant ape-like man that is possibly prehistoric, giant Pithecus, or whatever Grover Krantz posited it was. That was the old 70s, 80 paradigm. And then I started to see, 10 years ago, read Stan Gordon's book about my home state, silent invasion. Why are all these Bigfoot being seen with UFOs? And I mean, there's obviously layers and layers and books and hours of research that start to connect these dots. So there's some connection there. Then we talk about, Ron Moorhead reports these kind of orbs and like lightsabers floating through his camp. Clearly there is something going on. And that brings us to, I think, today, and books like yours, and there are very few out there like them. That's why I wanted to talk to you. There has to be a common denominator between, things that Ron Moorhead in quantum physics are looking at. The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. They have a NASA astrophysicist on the premises now for 4 seasons, who has detected a certain, frequency that is a common denominator to all these weird things that happen there. You've covered many of them in your books, strange cryptids on the property, UFOs. There's obviously some sort of connection between all that. But before we segue into the science of it, because I want to hear more of that from you, I think your background in sociology is very interesting for many reasons, because we talked about the stigma behind reporting this kind of stuff, let alone the institutions, right? So there's 2 layers to this. There's eyewitnesses who have to process it, right? First of all, and if they can even do that and not push it back, they have to talk about it. That rarely happens, probably. Then they have to kind of endure a lot of ridicule. That's why I wanted to talk to Paul Freeman's son. Again, I didn't know that Michael, his son, existed. I wanted Paul to have that chance. I wanted to know more about him. But you talked about child abuse. We also have alien abductions. You talked about Jacques Vallée, UFO sightings, cryptid experiences, Bigfoot sightings, all of these things. The eyewitnesses, there's two layers. The eyewitnesses need to come forward first. That's the first hurdle. But then the second is institutional, like you've been speaking to. You have the National Park Service, the government, the military, the media, our sociology, our communities who still attach great stigma and ridicule around these topics. That might be loosening up now that the government is saying like, oh, these Tic Tacs might be a threat. We're going to acknowledge them and call them UAPs or whatever. So that's why I think your sociology background and you talking so much about these institutional, let alone eyewitness barriers is so interesting, because I'm hoping that communications like this, books like yours, dialogues like this kind of loosen that up a bit. But getting into the science of things, you talk about Bigfoot having glowing eyes, batteries dying, telepathy, cloaking, having incredible speed, trapping people in portals so they're disoriented, missing time. These are all things I've read thousands and thousands of Bigfoot eyewitness accounts, right? So when you talk about coherent matter, I read a book on the subject, and like I said, a lot of it, the scientific part, when you get into deep dives, probably a bit over my head, but maybe in layman's terms, you can explain, getting more into the Bigfoot topic, how coherent matter, dark matter, ties these things together and makes Bigfoot possibly something that is paranormal and not flesh and blood, as many people still like to believe, who even believe in Bigfoot.
Yes. Hey guys, quick interlude with my interview with Simeon here. I wanted to thank you, first of all, for watching my videos and let you know there are a few ways to support me keeping them going. The first is to buy yourself a Bigfoot T-shirt at creatureportal.com. That features an illustration of Patty by me, Patty's face. It's an awesome T-shirt. It's available in 3 colors and also as a pullover sweatshirt and a hoodie. The other way you can support me is to buy some of my music on bandcamp.richardturgeon.com. Both sites, for any purchases, you can add a donation on top of that. That helps me keep my music and these kinds of videos going. And in any case, I appreciate your support, all the subscriptions that have come through, and just all the views that have come through on my most recent video with Michael Freeman. So without any further ado, back to my interview with Simeon. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, such a huge topic, isn't it?
It is.
So before I just talk about coherent matter, it is surprising that this is so sociological, isn't it? Even to me. It's just there's enormous pressure on people in general to fit in.
Yeah.
Stick with the program. And then this is what sociologists will point out. And as a former statistician, this leads to bias in the data. If you don't have accurate data, you can't get accurate estimates of anything. We know this just from basic statistics. There's all types of bias as a statistician that you look for in samples. How are samples created? I was involved in survey research. Any bias in the way the questions are worded. We were taught how to construct surveys. We see these now daily. Anytime you do anything, people say, "Can you fill out a short survey?" Okay, before the internet, that was done by phone. And everyone's familiar with this, but you learn about ways that your results might not be worth very much if you're biasing the outcome ahead of time by the way you phrase the questions, by the people that you're talking to, if it's not a representative sample of the population. Well, we've got all this in spades with these topics, Rich, because if people feel that their jobs are going to be endangered by talking about everything the Pentagon's been talking about. Now, the people who brought it forward, it's not just the government said, okay, we're going to finally recognize this. It's those pilots, Ryan Graves and Dave Fravor, and then it was Chris Mellon from the Pentagon and Lou Elizondo, people we're familiar with now. Chris Mellon said just a couple days ago in an interview I saw, he said he and Lou had to sneak those 3 videos out of there.
Right.
Okay, and now the Navy says we're not giving you any more. But see, so everyone knows what's going on here is you're not going to get a very accurate sense of reality if people are scared to say what they've experienced. But we've all been hearing about this the whole time. Now, going back to your question, so and this is what sociologists would do. We would be skeptical of the skeptics We're going to flip it around. And why are the skeptics so skeptical? I mean, what about weren't we taught that science is looking at all of the evidence? So if you're discounting what the witnesses are saying because it doesn't fit in your little boxes of what you think reality is, you're not scientific anymore. You're not doing science. You're doing ideology. You've become a communazi. It's one of my history for. You've just decided what the ideology is ahead of time, and you're not going to look at anything that doesn't fit your ideology because your guys, Marx or Lenin, whoever, didn't say it, so you must be part of the bad. You're the bourgeoisie. Anyway, it's ideology, it's not science. That's where we've gone with these topics. Even the Bigfoot researchers, as you're saying, flesh and blood, they want it to fit in because everyone's afraid they're not going to have scientific credibility if they say what's really happening. So let's skim off all the weird stuff. The weird stuff is the coherent matter part. And this is where it starts. And since that's your question, let's address it. This goes back to Albert Einstein and Satyendra Bose, an Indian physicist who wrote to Einstein looking at the photoelectric effect and saying, look, I can explain some of the effects we see with radiation that led to the special theory of relativity. And when Einstein worked with Max Planck about black body radiation, and it didn't fit the line they thought it should fit of how energy is emitted as energy is put into an object, how the light is emitted. It wasn't smooth. It was quantized. They couldn't figure this out, and it led to inaccuracies of prediction in the shorter wavelengths. It would be as if you're playing your guitar and all of a sudden it just goes out of tune at the high notes. That's the way it was before Einstein and Planck came along and created quantum mechanics. It didn't fit the linear electromagnetic idea. So the scientists created quantum mechanics based on many observations and experiments. And one of the outcomes of that was a guy named Bose, and Einstein looked over his work and agreed with him, that said, if you had particles that you keep lowering the temperature and slowing them down, they should lose any individuality and become one big particle called a Bose-Einstein condensate. People were skeptical at the time, just like people were skeptical of black holes, even though we've seen photos of those in the last couple of months from the Hubble Space Telescope, and now we got the James Webb Telescope up there, which will give us even better photographs. But people were suspicious of this until it was actually seen in 1995 in Boulder, Colorado, at the NIST facility at the University of Colorado, where they actually cool a substance down so slow that it becomes one big electron, right? I forgot what atoms they were using, but it's just one atom. In other words, it becomes all wave and no particle. Mm-hmm. Well, what Tesla and others showed is that you get Bose-Einstein condensates not just at absolute zero when there's no energy in the system. You can get it, and this is what Tesla was attempting to do and did do, with pulse discharge devices and so forth, and other researchers called dusty plasmas. In essence, if the particles, just like in a Bose-Einstein condensate, are at the same temperature and the same frequency, and since quantum mechanics tells us everything has a frequency, if the particles are all at the same frequency, they lose their identity and become one big particle. And they now can quantum entangle across large distances. They can teleport, they can cloak, they can create invisibility. And the Lockheed Martin patent from 2021 talks about doing all this using something called the Aharonov-Bohm effect, which is essentially an attempt to create Bose-Einstein condensates without cooling anything down. Just manipulating energy using some of the quantum effects that David Bohm was famous for, and his student Yakir Aharonov, who I've heard him talk about. Aharonov is still alive. I've heard him lecture about this. What they realized is you can create quantum coherency in macroscopic scale objects, not just in a lab in a very isolated situation at the subatomic scale and so forth. You could create it in objects that we relate to at our mesoscale, as it's called, large scale. When you create this coherent matter, it's going to do some of the strangest things that you could imagine. I mean, literally teleportation. It's going to be gliding around. It's going to be melting things at room temperature, Rich. It's going to be creating ball lightning that when it goes through a window is going to leave the window aluminum frame soft, but cold. inverse effects that defy common sense. But this is what the Bose-Einstein and condensate did, except that researchers found that you could create it at room temperature. And what did they call it? Cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction. It's all the same thing. It's coherent matter. And researchers like Takaaki Matsumoto, who I mentioned, realized when he looked through his electron scanning microscope at the University of Hokkaido in Sapporo, Japan, you had micro ball lightning and micro black holes. You had what he called electronuclear collapse, black holes, neutron stars. And so here's the big take-home message from all this. And it's a mind blower. It's a real mind blower.
I'm ready.
The whole damn thing is fractal. What we see going on in the cosmos happens at the smallest scale in plants, in our bodies, in biological systems. And this is what Takaaki Matsumoto realized, and this is why he was censored. This is not a conspiracy theorist. This is an ordinary, highly qualified, physics researcher, and realizes cold fusion is a type of charge clusters. They're so condensed, they form mini black holes, coherent structures. Ken Shoulders, working at SRI and other places, colleague of Hal Puthoff, called them exotic vacuum objects, charge clusters. Alexander Shishkin, a Russian researcher, called it string vortex solitons. Other researchers have called it magnetohydrodynamics, but it's all the same thing. When matter is compressed, it does exactly what the Bose-Einstein condensate does. It becomes a pure wave. Mm-hmm. And you get this compression naturally, Rich, in nature. You get it down deep in the earth. This is why you get it at plate tectonics. This is why, and I've seen these lectures, Marsha Adams and others. Why do they see ball lightning right before an earthquake? It's the compression of plate tectonics. The energy is moving up, comes out at the top of the mountain. They were even proposing that NASA could detect earthquakes ahead of time by looking for ball lightning. Mm. So this is what we learned from all this research in cold fusion LENR. Thanks to the MFMP, Bob Grenier, and other researchers, is that this simplifies into the same phenomena. Compressed matter causing electronuclear collapse at a subatomic level. We're talking about the atom collapsing in from compression. Instead of the Coulombic repression that we're all used to from like repels, this is what we were taught. There's another force that takes over when the atoms are much closer together and they're in a small space. This is what the palladium, hydrogen does in the palladium, and the early cold fusion devices. It's just all particle compression of one type or another, electrons or other types of particles. It literally transmutes into other elements. Mm-hmm. Shape-shifting. You get carbon coming out of pure lead. You get sulfur coming out of pure oxygen. It's what Isaac Newton was interested in it, but it wasn't the way he thought it would happen. Mm-hmm. The Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is cold fusion. And all of the research points to this, whether it's Ken Shoulders, Takaaki Matsumoto, Alexander Parkhomov, great Soviet and now Russian researcher. So here's how this all links up to cryptids and all these phenomena. There, I'm just going to say, could be life forms that figured out everything I just said a long time ago. And it's tremendously advantage to them as hunters and predators to cloak, transport, teleport, become invisible, and have tremendous power and speed and be able to transmute. And we wouldn't know they're here because they're so good at it. Why would they give it away? Why would a predator doesn't give its advantage away to the prey? We're the prey. I'm not saying they're predatory, but I'm saying compared to them, it's the hardest thing for us to accept, Rich, is that something's involved. We've been taught by our system, we're the top. And I'm happy to be proven wrong about this, but I just think if defense contractors now are patenting coherent matter, that's what they call it, coherent matter wave. Yeah. Nature doesn't just come up with things that didn't exist. Everything that's ever been discovered already existed. It's just that we're learning about it.
Yeah.
By the time someone patents something, that's when they finally understood what nature was already doing. This is what Leonardo da Vinci, and Nikola Tesla and many others told us. Everything we do, even our laptops, our computers, is just harnessing nature's electromagnetic energy. These coherent systems are the inverse of our normal technology. They don't radiate in the same way. They don't play nice with electronics. They discharge really quickly. The amount of energy in these compressed charge clusters is mind-boggling. And when it comes apart at the end of its little life cycle, you don't want to be around it.
Right.
People have been injured by ball lightning. It can explode. It can form masers. Do you know what a maser is? You do. It's like a laser
No, I don't.
from microwave radiation.
Right.
And it leaves behind razor sharp cuts. Okay? Razor sharp cuts in anything it comes in contact with, including animals. So there's a whole range. This is all I'm going to say about it. And this is what dark matter monsters is about. We can get into what the dark matter is in a second, because it does have to do with the cosmos, relic neutrinos. This is an important component of this. But just to keep this simple, Einstein and Bose proposed this 100 years ago. It's finally discovered in NIST only at cold temperatures, but just like reality, researchers realize it's not just lab and cold, it's out in nature. And people like Takeaki Matsumoto say, wait a minute, it's not the exception, it's the rule. It's neutron stars, it's black holes. And in you and me, there's these miniature versions of what's happening out in the cosmos, as above, so below. And this is very powerful stuff, but no one ever told us about it. And this is what we're dealing with. So in essence, to something, I know I'm giving very long answers, but you're asking really good questions. I'm just arguing in this book that what cryptids are.
Yes.
The symptoms are so similar to what you see in cold fusion tests: sudden temperature changes, discharges battery, things shifting, seeming invisible. What cryptids are is a type of life that harnesses this energy naturally, just from hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. And they're so evolved that we don't see them very often. And if they want to remain cloaked, they can do it. And not just cloaked, their harmonics are such that they're at different frequencies than we are.
Yeah.
We're not even going to perceive them until they're back at our frequency. Doesn't mean, I got to say one thing about this before we go on. I was talking with this a friend last night over a beer who's been interested in that. I've known him since kindergarten, Dominic. And he was asking a very question, which I wonder about too. Are they less solid than we are since they're interdimensional? Is that what you mean, Simeon, interdimensional? That's not what interdimensional is. It's not less solid. It's having a wider frequency response. Like when you play a string on a guitar, they're harmonics. They have more harmonics that they can move to. And when they're in those harmonic states, we don't perceive them as well in the same way, or that it's almost like they're in a parallel reality. They're in the same space, but they're not at the same frequency. Okay.
Right.
I think I've said a lot here.
No, that was
Does it make sense?
Yes, it did. It was a mind-blowing response. It was a lot to absorb. There's so much there. I've been when I'm looking down, I'm jotting down little notes, but let me quickly recap, and I'll probably get it wrong, but dark matter or coherent matter is basically you're slowing down particles to the point where they become one big wave. Is that an easy way to explain it?
A macroscopic quantum object.
Okay.
It's what quantum mechanics tells us, is things can have a particle nature and a wave-like nature. This is shifting into the wave-like side. It doesn't mean that they're not physical. It just means they're more on the E side versus the MC
They're over
side.
there.
Yeah, they're on the E side of the equation, not the MC side of the E equals MC squared. Yeah.
On a spectrum of frequencies, they're just not in this little range that humans recognize.
Exactly. Spread out.
Right.
The quantum mechanics tells us it's real.
Yeah. So there seems to be, I watched your YouTube video with Ron Moorhead last week as I was preparing for this chat with you. And I think he's a fascinating guy. I was aware of him before. I saw him in David Paulides' documentary, Missing 411. That segment was fascinating. I think he's very credible. He's very well spoken. I wholeheartedly believe his experiences. I had my own Bigfoot audio experience that sounded very similar to
Wow.
his recordings. And I didn't make that connection until several months later. I'm not going to get into my experience because I want you to spend your time talking, but I've been very intrigued by him, and he has a book out, I know, Quantum Bigfoot. I haven't read that yet.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And I'm just wondering how much parity there is between your findings that you talk about in your book and Quantum Bigfoot, the things that he talks about in his book. He seems to be reaching similar conclusions. Would you say that that's true, or do you differ in opinions on?
No, I think it's the same conclusion. I'm just going a little farther into it because we have all this research from condensed matter physics. I mean, a long time ago in sociology graduate school, one of my committee supervisors recommended I get a subscription to Science magazine. So I've read every issue pretty much since 1989. I don't understand everything, but I look over every article, read the abstract. Okay, there's a whole area of science called condensed matter. And so I'm very familiar with this side of it. And that's where you get this idea that you can have metamaterials, things that shift frequency. I mean, this is what condensed matter physicists are fascinated by, is all these materials around Bohm effect, where the shape affects the frequency, and you get all sorts of exotic effects like superconductivity, right? Where the resistance goes away and it conducts electricity perfectly with no loss and no heat loss. All these effects that science are always considering to be the holy grail of a new type of electronics. You've heard of quantum computers. So I'm familiar with all this, and it all connects into coherent matter, condensed matter, coherent matter, superconductivity. These are all sort of variations of the same topic. And I think this is what Ron is getting at in his books. If you did see my interview with him, I mean, again, he's one of the reasons that I write Dark Matter Monsters, because he's saying we never could see them.
Right.
We put the mics in the walls. We can hear that. You can listen to it. Look up Sierra Sounds. Anyone who's listening right now, look up Sierra Sounds. He put them online. I think if you get his CDs, he's got really long versions of it. You can hear about 20 minutes just online on YouTube. And that you hear them chittering and chattering about that. Claire, who I mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned, when her interviewer, Wes Germer, mentions it on Sasquatch Chronicles, he says it doesn't sound like anything like this, and he plays Sierra Sounds. She goes, that's exactly what it sounded like. She was on the beach at the Otter Sea Reserve in Carmel Heights area south of there. You're familiar with this. And they're coming out and picking seaweed, and the males giving it to the females and so forth. And then they have an argument over her because they see her and the male gets really upset and they're chittering. It's exactly what you can hear on Ron Moore. So Ron's hearing this, and he says to me, they should have been casting shadows on the lean-to hunting structure they sort of illegally built out there. The forest took it down, but they were up, it's the 70s, it's more carefree back then. They're out where no one else is. They build a structure. They keep going up year after year. He said, we put the mics in the walls. There's cracks. It's handmade. There's cracks between the tree trunks. We never saw any shadows, but we can hear them on the other side of the wall. We put our head out quick. Never.
Oh, Simeon, it looks like you froze there for 1 second.
The sounds were coming from one of these creatures making noises. I forget the exact sound it was making. Two of them said they couldn't get any closer than 15 feet. Same thing at Skinwalker Ranch. You read the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. Again, you're reading through this book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. James Lukatsky, Knapp, and Keller are also co-authors. And they're talking about these dark shapes on the trail. And as they walk towards it, they're getting the terror, the fear, and they can't get any closer. It sounds like the same sort of thing. It's only so close you can get to it before you feel paralyzed. This is what people report around cryptids. Yeah. And again, what leads me to believe these are all variations of a coherent matter. I'm not saying it's all just, I'm not explaining it away saying, oh, this is just ball lightning and they didn't encounter something with consciousness. I'm saying that there's life forms that can take advantage of that state of matter that you and I don't quite know how to do. Unless we trained in the Himalayan mountains with a yogi for 20 years, we probably wouldn't know how to levitate or do these things either. But they just naturally know how to manipulate matter like this.
He says that. He he says that in your interview with him. He says something about, I love the way he puts things in simple terms too. He said it's something about their ability to manipulate matter and turn that into energy. And so I was struck by that statement because as I'm watching Skinwalker Ranch, The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch, I'm no scientist, I'm certainly no genius. And I remember thinking the common denominator behind all these experiments and what Dr. Travis, I'm sorry, I don't remember his last name, Taylor is finding it's all energy. The common denominator here is whatever is out there. It's the ability to manipulate energy, whether they're aliens from outer space or some other galaxy or planet or whatever. And these cryptids that are running around the landscape, how are these connected? The symptoms are all the same.
They're symptoms are the same. And Ron Moorhead, this is why his Voices in the Wilderness and the Quantum Bigfoot are such good books. You don't necessarily have to agree with every little thing he says in his interpretation of it, but the main point is the same. Is you don't just get the flesh and blood experience that we've been told about. It doesn't fit the escaped gorilla, Gigantopithecus relic primate. It doesn't fit the normal mammal idea at all. And how can you discount Ron Moorhead? Someone, I believe he said they had 9 expeditions up, trips up there. They saw them most of the time until they shot that bear that charged them. Mm-hmm. Then they didn't see the creatures. You disturbed the force a little bit. They didn't like that. Yeah. Saw it even the time that they had some horse mishaps and they couldn't go up there, and they camped near the parking lot, 8 miles down back by the parking lot with his wife and daughter. And that's where they see the only time he saw one, way off. Can you imagine hearing those sounds so many times, and you can hear it on these ears, and it sounds close by? Even the ones in distance where they're doing call and response. You would think you'd see something. Something. Nothing. They're like invisible. So when you read Ken Shoulders talking about exotic vacuum objects and this coherent matter and these electron charge clusters, everyone's talking about the same thing, just different varieties of it. Russians, I should just say as an aside, Russian classified research discovered this in the 90s. They called it an electromagnetic phantom. You could create this donut torus-shaped device of wire, hypertoruses, kind of toruses within toruses. You can kind of imagine it. It's in Dark Matter Monster. I have an artist, Eva Giddings, recreate what they found. The torus is on top of torus. It's a fractal idea. That when you turned it off, the glow was still there for up to 2 days in the same space on the table. And they called it an electromagnetic phantom. Does that sound like all what we're talking about? There's a physical side to it, but the fractal, again, this is what I was studying in grad, because how it kind of all connects. The fractal structure of it, self-similar, all the way down, smaller and smaller, all the way down to the 0 point, the quantum vacuum, condenses energy, and it doesn't it's not like our technology where it spreads out. It just condenses and condenses and condenses, and then it's glowing. Just from the field itself. It's called non-radiating source. It's not dispersing, it's compacting. That's why it's another state of matter. And the Soviets knew about this. They called them, bagels. It's been called toroidal moments, fractal, electromagnetic phantoms. But it's all the same idea, hypertoruses. Just think of a donut, okay? A very active donut with smaller donuts on it, all the way smaller. The only shape that completely fills space-time energetically, what the Soviets found. This is the same thing that other researchers have found. We don't know about it because the disinformation, it's been classified. Even in the Soviet Union, it was classified. Now they don't exist anymore. Soviet Union, the scientists started talking. But when you hear people like Ron Moorhead, and you know about the fractal bagels and the electromagnetic phantoms, it just, and you hear Ron talking about these lightsabers going through the forest. You mentioned that, or the tuning fork above. We're both musicians. Like, it's
what was that?
It's the same reality that the Bigfoot are part of and UFOs are part of this. You could call it a parallel reality. I mean, this stuff was discovered in the 50s. And again, the censorship set in. Hugh Everett III, I have videos about the multiverse idea and many worlds idea from Hugh Everett. And it's been expanded into different versions of many interacting worlds. But it says that even just from quantum mechanics as we know it, you have alternate paths, parallel paths with different versions of reality, have different harmonics. Just think of it like a fretboard. You have all the harmonics. You could have the main melody, but you could have during the solo another version, inverted chords and the harmonics and playing around with that melody. That's the parallel side to it. It's harmonious with the main melody, but it exists too, kind of as its own thing, and they work together. And this is what these realities are. And to me, and again, anyone who wants to come up with another theory, I'm open to hear it. But to me, this is why the symptoms are the same: sudden temperature changes, battery and camera failure, brain fog, time space loss. I mean, I mentioned in Dark Matter Monsters, someone I know in Boulder, she went hiking with a friend in the Rockies, and all of a sudden they're back in the parking lot and they can't account for the time. And they don't know how they don't remember coming back. And they're talking to the park ranger, and he says, well, it's too dark to go in now. And how did they go 20 minutes in the trails and they're back? You know, I've talked to Bigfoot witnesses who said this happened just as they're about to take a picture. All of a sudden they're back in their truck, and there's no picture. It's not supernatural in Simeon's view. Mm-hmm. These are coherent matter effects. Coherent matter is such a strong type of matter. Just to sum it up, what is dark matter? We know it's the type of matter that physicists have told us for the last 100 years outnumbers regular matter 10 to 1. It's not visible. But the movement of galaxies tells us there has to be other matter that we're not seeing from the angular momentum and the rotational speed and all that. The big discovery from the Russian scientists about dark matter is it's not just out there. It's flowing, it's fluxing around the sun, the moon. Alexander Parkhomov, he built devices that could detect. It's a pressure change. It doesn't interact with us directly electromagnetically, but it creates enough pressure. Relic neutrinos are 1 or 2% of dark matter. NASA and CERN have said this. They're particles from the cosmic background radiation of the Big Bang. Relic neutrinos, because there are 10 million going through every second, something like that. They're ubiquitous and they're large. They're not solar neutrinos that are tiny, that never interact with us, that are super fast. They're slow, they're big, they interact with molecules and biological systems. They can sustain cold fusion reactions. All the equations from cold fusion show that neutrinos, not neutrons, neutrinos could sustain a cold fusion reaction. Where do you get them from? They're flowing in all the time. This is what Alexander Parkhomov, and remote viewers have known about this, Rich, because there's this idea in RV called sidereal time. RV sessions tend to get better when you're facing away from the center of the Milky Way. When you're facing in, that so-called sidereal time, when the Earth is facing into the center of the Milky Way, which apparently is a black hole, and there are a lot of emissions, there's more noise coming in. Well, this is the sort of thing that Alexander Parkhomov found in his own way with the relic neutrinos. There's changes to biological and chemical reactions that shouldn't be happening if the textbooks are true, but there's variations by time of year and time of day and so forth, which suggests that the position of the sun to Earth, solar, is affecting this flux of dark matter flows. Mm-hmm. This is why it became Dark Matter Monsters, because if dark matter outnumbers us 10 to 1, it shouldn't be surprising that there are dark matter life forms that are out there too that have taken advantage of this type of matter, and that it could, if you had evolved, you could be tapping into this relic neutrino flux and deriving. It's a pressure. It's energy. It could be providing energy to your system in a way that, like, you're always gathering energy. You would be able to do things that the rest of us who don't know quite how to process this. Mm-hmm. Again, that's just what I'm arguing in the book, is you have this relic neutrino flux, and it can do some really interesting things, and it can flux and it can flow. and affect even things like radioactive decay rates, which shouldn't change according to standard understanding of physics, but there's variation, that there's sort of a cosmological link. And that's what martial arts tells us, Qigong, that there's like, basically, the dark matter researchers tell us that Qi, as we've understood it, is real. And you're absorbing it in the form of relic neutrinos and re-emitting it from your body all the time as cold neutrinos, same sort of thing, large, slow particles. I've seen demonstrations of psychokinesis while I was in Japan that were mind-boggling. You know, a cigarette being directed at me across the room that went into a shirt pocket with force from 20 feet away, 15 or 20 feet away. There's no way you would do that throwing cigarettes at me all day. It would never go in the pocket. Boom. I've seen this cigarette float around above this. He did with notes, and he floated things above. So I'm thinking it's got to be a string. I mean, am I skeptical? He must have read my mind, because he looks at me, and all of a sudden that cigarette's coming like a torpedo at me and goes in. I've seen psychokinesis, and I know from having talked to people in the government, I talk about this in Dark Matter Monsters, that the U.S. government was monitoring Soviet PK experiments where spoons were bent from 1,000 miles away from the center to the spoon. This is a real effect. But once you understand relic cold neutrinos, I mean, there are still some questions around it, but we actually emit coherent energy like this that can bend and warp and change things that Uri Geller could do. So anyway, what I'm arguing here again is maybe humans are not the most evolved life form around. I know it's an ego buster to think of this way. It goes against everything about maybe some creatures know how to manipulate and do this, because some of the researchers I talked to said when the creatures were around them, I said light objects levitated. I said it wasn't just light things. Things like light bulbs came out of the sockets.
Yeah.
Engines started with no battery. They had taken the battery. I think they were using the battery for heat or something. The engine started. Just that sort of strange thing that, again, goes back to what happened around Uri Geller at the SRI researchers.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of connects itself. Is that this is just enough. So to sum it up, I mean, there's like a coherency continuum. And at one level, there's where everything's differentiated, kind of like this, to some degree, different colors, shapes, textures. The coherency continuum is where you lose some of the individuality, but you gain some energetic benefits. And I think the cryptids have given up some of their individuality in exchange for energy benefits. This is my feeling about it. We're more humans in the direction of individuality. You don't play guitar the way I play guitar. We're all a little different. That's the way we are as humans. Even within the same ethnic group, there's a lot of variation. Well, I think the cryptids have kind of given some of that up over many thousands of years, in exchange for some incredible physics benefits, which they find as a okay exchange. So they're probably more I'm not saying they're all the same. I mean, they have names and they talk and there's differences, but I think they've given up some of their individuality in exchange for the benefits of current matter, where we humans actually have to form companies and corporations and labs to recreate the things that they already know how to do, because they're a little less differentiated. That's sort of my take on it. Again, I'm happy to be shown that I'm wrong about that.
No, that's fascinating.
Coherency continuum. At one hand, we have Bose-Einstein condensates and life forms more like the Bose-Einstein condensate. And the other end of the spectrum, we have more anarchy and more like we are, where we're all, each individual personality. And that's what we relish about humanity. But we don't quite have the same natural superpowers, I think, that the cryptids have, because people have seen them do, as you're aware. You interviewed Paul Freeman's son, and they can do things that seem absolutely mind. They can seem like they're gliding. People who have been picked up sleeping around a campfire by them said they didn't hear any footprints once. They just felt like they're flying across the forest. They're not going up and down. Yeah. They're not hearing crunching in the leaves. They're incredible.
It's like this fluid movement through space.
Very fluid movement. Just to me, again, show me I'm wrong. It doesn't seem like the same type of matter that we're made of. I think it's a fifth state of matter. They're utilizing another state of matter. It just fits everything we know about this. and they can do the types of things that are beneficial to them. Even David Paulides, you mentioned Missing 411, he talks about a lot of this happening by boulders.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
When people ask him, he says, I never said Bigfoot was doing it. I watch his video channel. He has it. I don't know quite how to explain this. He has it in his Missing 411 The Hunted, a section with Ron Moorhead and Bigfoot. But when people ask him, is Bigfoot responsible for this?
I've met David. He won't come out and say it. He's an ex-police officer, as you're aware.
Yeah, and they don't. They don't create theories. They gather the data. Just get the facts.
He's very evidence-based.
Yeah, it's his training. Yeah. And I appreciate, and the letters that he gets in his are amazing to listen to. People, oh my God, are those incredible? Mm-hmm. People's experiences. He reads these before he goes into the missing, about the orbs and missing time, and that one guy playing the fiddle, and they started hearing that melody come back in the sound of a bird call, but it keeps going deeper and deeper into the forest. Did you hear that one?
No, I did not.
They're going about they're a mile in and get the feeling, wait a minute, what are we doing? We're just following this deeper and deeper. And they go back to the car and it follows them back up. I don't know. Maybe it was just a bird that was, birds can imitate us very well, but it was creepy. But those stories are great. But so we don't know if Bigfoot is involved in these missing people cases. But when you read some of the dicier encounters, it does make you wonder if that person hadn't made it out of there, what would have happened to them when they took them off going into the backcountry, Glacier, or Yellowstone. You have to wonder.
So that's a segue into
it's a whole big
David's work, because that's a whole conversation itself. But again, in the spirit of connecting dots over time, I've read thousands of eyewitnesses. You've talked to eyewitnesses. I've talked to eyewitnesses as I travel to different hotspots, et cetera. I'll ask locals about their experience. I was just in the Marble Mountains Wilderness area this year. I talked to somebody who worked at the Forest Service, and I struck up a conversation about trailheads, et cetera. And I said, I'm going to ask you a crazy question. That's my segue into, to the locals, right? Have you ever had a Bigfoot experience or heard of one? Yes, he did. My uncle's a hunter. He was out in this valley. It's right over there. Happy Valley, I think it's called, or something. He knew the area like the back of his hand, hunted it all the time. And he started to enter an area of the forest that he didn't recognize. And he became very disoriented and got lost when he came back. Hours had gone by. It was one of those missing time things. David has reported these kinds of stories in his work. I have his books in my library back there, the Hooper Project, some of his Missing 411 books or whatever. I've seen these kinds of accounts on the internet. So again, I did want to talk to you more about not just their abilities, but is it Bigfoot? Are they good? Are they benevolent? I hear these benevolent stories that you point out in your book. Are they bad? Are they can be aggressive? They can be threatening. Have they captured people and skirted them away through a portal? I don't know. But again, in reading all of these crazy accounts that don't fit this kind of flesh and blood missing ape kind of theory, that's why we're talking. Like, what is going on? What do they want? What do they want other than to procreate and survive? What is their relationship to us? Do you have a theory on that?
I think they like to avoid us.
I do too.
I don't totally blame them. Yeah. We like to avoid each other a lot of the time. Look what's going on the planet.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy. And even as violent as they can be with each other, we've heard examples of this. Mm-hmm. They do have their own code of ethics and their own laws and their own language. I mean, they're another hominid that predates us probably.
Yeah.
And they have a code of conduct. But just like humans have a lot of variation, it would be nice if they were furry giants. Mm-hmm. If they were Chewbacca's.
Nice.
Probably, but it's not the case. Not based on my reading. Again, assuming these collections of stories that I'm reading from park rangers and so forth have not just been created as fiction. I mean, if someone could show me, hey, this has all just been made up. If that's what someone shows me, I would change my idea. But just talking to friends who've encountered them out there, it is going to be one of the biggest shocks of your life.
Yeah.
If you can hold it together when you're looking at something that's 10 feet tall, you know, head as big as a huge pumpkin and shoulders as wide as a truck. If you can hold it together without running, I'll be impressed, because my friends, the people I've talked to who've seen this, these are experienced people. They have encountered a lot, but when they finally encountered this, they were scared out of their wits.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was the intention of the creatures to do that, or if they were just creatures were having fun and we're the ones, you know, it's not just their massive size. They emit some type of energy that instills terror. Sure. I don't know if it's intentional or not, if it's, again, a night type of electromagnetic energy.
Intentional ultrasound is another theory.
Yeah, we've got all this. There's so much we don't know about this, and I hate to be the one to say, oh, it's this or that. I don't know either. I'm relatively new to the topic. Now, Ron Moorhead, you talked to him, and he didn't feel afraid of them. They never threatened him. They got some sort of generally benevolent ones, though they did play a couple tricks here and there. You know, they go through your camp, and it sounds like it's being torn apart. And I heard about this again recently in another case. I did go on a Bigfoot adventure weekend in Bailey, Colorado recently, and our group didn't see anything, but we got an email from the same people that run those a couple weeks later with the horseback expeditions they do out in Guffey, Colorado. They had the same thing that Ron Moore had talked about, the sounds of crashing and things. But when you wake up in the morning, people have described the sound of a big truck coming up behind them and the wheel spinning and the door slamming, and they looked out and there's these guys like to play with us. But
yeah,
if you look at A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, and just fair disclosure, I'm in the sequel that'll be coming out either later this year.
Oh, great. I saw that last weekend. It was a great film.
Yeah, I loved the film, and I didn't know the producers when I saw it, but they came across dark matter monsters and they said, well, this is what we're looking for. So we filmed episode 2. There'll be other people and new witness encounters. And so that's called A Flash of Beauty to Paranormal Bigfoot.
Okay.
And I'm told they liked a lot of what I had to say to them when we filmed at WSU and we went to near Grover Cranston and so forth. What I liked about the first one, apart from the physical beauty of it, the beautiful drone photography, Brett Eichenberger is a great drone photographer, the testimony. I liked what the psychologist had to say and some of the experiencers. One, there's as much variation in the Bigfoot as there is in humans. You know, you got ones that'll rescue you. There's ones that'll be neutral. And there's some that are, psychotic. Okay, let's just be honest. Hope you don't run into those. But just like humans. But at the end, they have the psychiatrists who say it's not just that you won't tell anybody about this because it's so. And this has been true of my friends who've only told me recently about things that they've experienced. It was hard for them to talk about it too. It's traumatic. It's PTSD.
Yeah, it's
PTSD. This is something we're not trained to encounter, and it can be really scary. But what those psychiatrists said was you won't even remember it. The brain has a boggle point. It's a defense mechanism. I imagine this happens to crime victims too. You've heard about people describe this.
Yes.
Physical assault and so forth is you can't remember what happened. You just wake up unconscious later and you're happy it happened that way because you didn't want to be, we've heard about this.
Like going into shock psychologically.
A shock. It happens to soldiers in wartime. You can read about this happening in Ukraine, Russian war right now when you read reports of what's happening, that the blank stare, the empty look in the eyes. Okay, this seems to happen to some Bigfoot witnesses for a variety of reasons. And these psychiatrists pointed out to us, they won't even remember it later on. So what I'm wondering is I don't remember a single Bigfoot encounter I've ever had, and I've hiked by myself in the woods. I love being outdoors. I've done it since I was a kid. I've done bike trips by myself. I've hiked by myself. I mean, I like it in groups. I mean, but I go out by myself. I can't find anyone. No matter what the Pleiades says, I just keep going out there. I don't even have a personal locator beacon, but maybe I'll have one soon. I think they're building into the new iPhone, by the way. They have that built in.
He'd encourage you to pack a pistol everywhere. That's his advice.
Well, I have firearms training in recent years, but I didn't know about this coming from the East Coast. People didn't own firearms where I grew up in New York. So I would not go out there. But, you know, I bear spray now, and I'm a little more prepared, I have to say. I can handle myself. But this has made me wonder a little bit, Rich. If you don't remember the encounters because it's off your mental reality box tuner, it's just outside the tuning range, have many of us had encounters with these creatures? And it's sort of a question we can't answer, but I hope we will sort of get to know this over the years. Have we had encounters that we don't remember? Mm-hmm. I think it's a fair question.
Yeah.
UFO, ET, I mean, are we forgetting about some of these? Maybe for a good reason. It's just that your brain doesn't know how to process it. And the only reason I'm saying that is I heard the Stan Gordon's talk. I heard these lectures, Kawani Lapsirdis and others. And I didn't think about it that much. I mean, I remembered it. I had the DVD, Stan and Kawani. I had them there, and I occasionally I'd replay them, and I'd forget it. I'd forget it because it didn't fit into even my reality box coming into these topics. And this is how I sort of conclude the book, Dark Matter Monsters. I mean, if it took me this long, and I'm almost 60 now, to understand that there really are cryptids, I really believe this, there really are cryptids out there, rare, but they're out there. Law enforcement's not going to talk about it. They're going to say you saw a bear or a wolf. National Park Service, according to what I read, they're just going to say we don't scare people, don't talk about it. And if it's being covered up like that, and have we forgotten about some of these encounters? And the way I sort of semi-forgot about the lectures I heard at good lectures at UFO conferences, because it didn't quite fit into any box until I understood coherent matter. It didn't quite fit. So I kind of, let it go the way many of us could. So I'm wondering if I can forget about lectures I heard. I mean, I kind of know them, but they weren't really there in my mind on an everyday basis like RV and crop circles would be, or, UFOs and things. So if you actually encountered one of these, it's not a lecture anymore. It's not a slide on a screen. I mean, it's staring at you. I mean, I just put up, people who go to my YouTube channel, I just put up that account yesterday. I don't know if you had a chance to see it. Barbara, who, after 50 years, she decides to tell her story. She heard me on another interview recently, and I wrote to her, I said, hey, I want to hear what you saw. I put it on you. She said, put this up. I've never really told anybody. This is 50 years. Let's talk about it now. China Lake Naval Weapons Station. We're out there on a Smithsonian sanctioned, Smithsonian arranged dig for arrowheads and petroglyphs and things, photographs. And she says, we just go into the tent and something's touching my face. You saw it in a flash of beauty. It's rubbing. She thinks it's
Kyle. That's right. That's right. I did see that. Yes.
You did see the video.
No, I saw her story in a flash of beauty, if that's what you're talking about.
No, that's another guy.
Oh, that's another guy. This is someone else. Okay. Yeah.
See the evidence coming together. Barbara never saw a flash of beauty. She didn't know people experience. People have talked about this. I've heard about this. She says, here we go. It's stroking her face. She's the only female there on the dig. It's small tents, 70s, small tents, not like park camping tents. We have a small. Your face is right there. It's stroking her. She thinks it's Kyle. Messing around with her in the dark. She says, Kyle, what are you doing? You can go to my YouTube channel. It's called,
I will watch this. Yeah.
And she says, all I can remember are the glowing yellow eyes. 9 foot, 10 foot off the ground. Everyone saw it. They ran out. It's 12 feet away from them. 12 feet. You can hear her describe it. It's still scary to this day. She says, I'm still feeling a little shaky talking about this. It's huge. I said, Barbara, was there a moon? No. Dark night. It's glowing. Glowing yellow. It's emitting light. Glowing yellow light. Yeah. Asked her later with green edges. Of course, you're not going to think about this very much. And if you remembered it, it's 50 years and Barbara came forward. Thank you, Barbara. The next morning, they all pile into the same tent. It runs away or it vanishes. She couldn't tell which. It's just gone. They all get back into the same tent, 4 people sleeping in 2 person. The next morning, they decide to leave early. Their footprints. They don't take any pictures. Everyone has a camera. She said they took pictures of the boulders and the petroglyphs and the arrowheads. They see footprints with a 5-foot stride, 13-inch print, 5 inches big footprint. They're thinking Bigfoot. They saw it. Nobody takes a picture. Now, this is what seems to be going on with this whole subject. People say, where's the evidence? People are getting PTSD. They're in shock. Just like the hunter you mentioned. They're in a forest. They're supposed to know this place like the back of the hand, and all of a sudden it's getting pretty scary. You don't know where you are. Are you in a parallel reality? Something messing with your mind? A Native American told Barbara she heard him saying that they can affect your mind, and she thought that's probably why I didn't take the picture. It was still probably around. And well, for the people who say there's not enough evidence, one, the witnesses have to feel comfortable enough to bring forward. They have to remember this. They have to get beyond the PTSD, which means they need to talk to professionals and feel like it's okay to talk about this. And then the regular hard-boiled scientists have to be willing to look at this evidence and not just say these people are delusional, like has been said in the past. And just as you pointed out at the beginning of the interview, Rich, if we have the researchers saying, well, we don't want the quantum woo-woo in our Bigfoot reports, just like Carter Bouchard has talked about, a BFRO licensed researcher from, I believe, Missouri, Arkansas. And he says when he submitted the reports to BFRO, they've been stripped of anything like we're talking about tonight, the teleportation,
any paranormal element,
light, the cloaking, all of this. And the witnesses even complained to him. They said, that's not what I told you.
Yeah.
So this is what we're dealing with. Can we deal with the data and the witness testimony without judging it just because it's different? There was a time when quantum mechanics was different. There was a time when the Copernican idea of the solar system was different than Ptolemy when it was sent, the Copernican. These things happen, and you look back in history, even meteorites were controversial. I was just reading Jean-Baptiste Biot's investigation of meteorites from 1804 in France. He wrote a book about it. Him and Ernst Chladni, by the way, the guy that created the Chladni patterns on metal plates. It's also looking at meteorites. And this is a good way to kind of close off the interview, just to remember this.
Yeah.
Meteorites were considered peasant folk lore. Urban legend, not urban legend, rural legend. And that French Academy of Scientists finally decided it was a hoax, and they threw away all the meteorites in France except the biggest one somewhere in Paris that they couldn't move because it weighed over a ton. And all the other museums in England and Germany followed and threw away all the meteorites because they realized it wasn't coming from space. They were from volcanoes or lightning striking rocks.
Very tidy.
Yep. They just let's throw out the evidence because it doesn't fit Aristotle.
Yep.
Are we any different than that? We like to think we're modern people that are evidence-based. It's sort of the definition of being modern is looking at evidence. Because back then people just fit the theory. They fit the data to the theory. If it didn't fit Aristotle, the data had to be wrong. Yeah. Everything was what Aristotle or the Vatican said. And if it didn't fit that, we all knew it was wrong. We're not going to look I'm not going to look through your telescope or your microscope because we already know there's nothing there. That was the attitude until very recently. But are we that different? And the same thing with meteorites. It took a massive meteorite shower over Eagle, France in 1804. And B.O. and Chladni and others went out and they walked around. They talked to witnesses. You read this account. It's fascinating. They talked to the shepherds. They talked to the wire pullers and people did back then, farmers. And they said, I heard this sound. It sounded like horses galloping over cobblestones. The meteorites coming in, the sonic booms. And they heard this over and over again. They said, we don't think these people are making this all up because we're talking to this guy and this woman and this person. And they're all telling us it sounds like the wheels of a carriage or the thundering of horses. And then we have samples. There were thousands of meteorites in one night. And that's what blew it open. A massive evidence. So I guess we have to ask ourselves, are we going to get that massive evidence from the UAP hearings for UFOs, or would it happen with the government maybe coming forward with this? We did see in Flash of Beauty, and if you go to the Bailey Bigfoot Museum, you will see National Forest Service reporting forms Mount Hood. So they're reporting it. So are we going to have a national discussion, or can people going to be continue to be traumatized? And let's just bring up Claire, since I dedicate the book to her. She's this translator, episode 515 of Sasquatch Chronicles. She goes out to the Sea Otter Reserve. Her lens drops off when the creatures come out. She first sees them riding across like gecko lizards on all fours. It's a weird motion. Think about it.
Yes.
It doesn't sound like an escaped gorilla to me.
No.
A writhing motion on all fours. Weird. People have described them like spider-like. How easy is it to talk about that? A huge spider walking on fingertips. How strong are you to walk on fingertips when you weigh 1,000 pounds? Think about this. So she sees him go out. I'm just repeating what I heard, and Ron Moorhead's talked to her. Her lens falls off. The male's out there, the females and some juveniles are around. The male sees her, starts thundering towards her, rams his hand into the ground, shakes the earth into the sand. Other people have reported they do this when they get mad. The females are arguing with the male. She feels like the females are trying to prevent the male from hurting her. But it yells. It's so loud. People have described it like being in front of the speakers at a rock concert, at a really loud rock concert like Black Sabbath or The Who.
Yeah.
And I've had friends at Black Sabbath concerts, okay? In the old days, it's loud. And your clothing vibrates. We've all felt that occasionally at concerts. You should be wearing earplugs when you're that close to the speaker. That's what it feels like when they're roaring at you, and she passes out. She comes to, and she's all the way back in her car. She's been dragged back there, and she's all bruised. They didn't kill her. They just dragged her back to the car, like saying, this is our beach. Human, get our seaweed.
We're going to drop you off here.
We're going to drop you off at the car.
Yeah.
She's bruised. She calls the police when she's a translator. She's working for some companies. She's from UK. Calls the police. They say what you saw was a bear. Yeah. And she says, you can hear her say in the interview, the last time I checked, bears don't have opposable thumbs. They don't talk. They don't walk on two legs continuously. And the police threatened her and said, if you know what's good for you, you'll say it was a bear, or we're going to deport you. It's illegal.
Wow.
And they say, do you speak English? She's a translator from the UK. He says, I'm English. I am English. Now, they really abused her. And it's not her fault what she encountered. And so many other witnesses that we haven't heard from. The witnesses are there. Yeah. But we need to have a system, Rich, where they can tell their story. And maybe we'll get what happened in Eagle, France, where we'll get thousands of little pieces come together in one night, and we'll realize it wasn't peasant folklore.
I hope so. I hope so.
It's fun stuff. It's great. Thanks.
I want to thank you immensely for your time. I hope I can follow up with a few surgical questions that I would love to incorporate into the blog post version of this. And I wanted to urge everybody out there who's interested in this topic, please pick up Simeon's book, Dark Matter Monsters. It is fascinating. It's a great read. It's not full of,
I'll sign
it. Darkmattermonsters.com.
Yeah. And if you go to newcrystalmind.com, my blog for all of my books and everything, darkmattermonsters.com is the book website. I have a link on newcrystalmind.com so I can sign a copy to you. And it's available in hardcover now with full color pictures. These were, it's the economics of I couldn't charge $50 for a softcover. So that's with color. It would have gotten too expensive. So this is just black and white. But if you want the color and you don't mind paying a little bit more, you can get the colorized version hardcover. And if you get it from Amazon, by the way, just contact me. I'm happy to send you a little stickable placard you could post in the front. Because look, I appreciate any of you that are listening to Rich's show. And you should listen to his music, by the way. It's great stuff. Great songs, Rich.
Thank you.
But anyone who's listening to this, thank you for taking the time to listen to us talk about this. This is important, and you're important to this too. People who've had Rich shared a great story with us that he heard from as a friend, a witness, and
complete stranger, and the first of many, or not the first, but one of many.
We need to pull the evidence together. Yeah. First, just listen to people who've had these stories, and don't talk too much like I do about it. Really listen to them. Yeah. Write it down, record it, because this is part of our history, and we need to know who we are. Yeah. What in the world is going on? What planet are we on? It's not what we were taught, guys and gals. So thank you for listening and being involved. And just don't give up. We're going to make progress, just like the UFO topic is made. I'm told there are big hearings coming out of the UAP thing from the naval witnesses and others. That those congressmen and senators and congresswomen, they want to know what's going on, and there's going to be hearings where and this should apply to the cryptids too, and this whole area of science, the whole area of. It shouldn't be just relegated to defense contractor patents. This is how nature works. Tesla was right about a lot of this. It's how it works, and we should be exploring it, investigating it. Push it. Isn't that what we're here to do?
Pushing it. That's why I'm talking to you.
Figure it out. This is new energy sources are here. New ways of relating to nature. I mean, it's abundance. It's this natural abundance, resonance. So we should be using it and engaging in it, and not just creating all this fear around it. Rich, we create this fear when we compartmentalize these topics and push it away, and people don't talk about it for 50 years. We should be talking about it. So anyway, if you're listening and you've been watching, get involved in whatever interests you in this. Get involved. Talk to your people. The stories are out there. I've just heard about them from people I know in Colorado and the Northwest. They're just people will have stories. You just have to be patient and listen to them without judgment, and you'll learn a lot, and we'll all learn together. So thank you.
That sounds great. Thanks again, Simeon, so much. It's been nothing short of fascinating, and I can't wait to share this with everybody who's tuning into the channel. So thanks again.
Thanks a lot.
I'll send you a follow-up. Have a great night.
Great. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Okay. Bye.